Howard University was founded in 1867 as a solution to a social justice problem, a place where recently freed African Americans could get a world-class education. Continuing this tradition, it was at Howard University where legal intellectuals laid the groundwork for the landmark case Brown versus the Board of Education, ending legal segregation in public schools and forever changing the course of history. And it's only fitting that I'm in front of the United Nations because a new generation of faculty and students are seeking global solutions to society's pressing social justice issues. In 1955, members of the anti-apartheid African National Congress laid out their vision for South Africa. Their Freedom Charter declared that South Africa would belong to all its people, no matter their color. For 50 years, apartheid education was designed to give privilege to whites. From the training of teachers to the building of schools, apartheid education entrenched inequality. Despite almost 20 years since the end of apartheid and increases in spending, the education system is still in dire straits.
South Africa invests a huge chunk of its GDP into education. Everybody, whether it's government or private sector, has found a need to invest in education.
To an extent, what is happening in South Africa today is an unavoidable result of the change to majority-rule democracy in 1994.
Because of apartheid to a large extent, a lot of the math and science skills have not been properly developed.
There is still a tremendous gap between the haves and the have-nots, maybe no longer racially based, but still based on people that have access to resources for themselves and their children and people who don't.
The Rainbow Nation went from an economy supporting about 5 million whites to an economy supporting 51 million people. For all its faults, the apartheid regime ran an efficient government and provided world-class education, healthcare, and local government services to a small minority.
The teachers are not appropriately trained. Most of the teachers come from the previous system where black people were not exposed nor trained appropriately to teach those levels.
We don't have as much strength on the teacher capacity, but creating content that can literally then enable people to be self-taught, I think is particularly powerful.
After coming to power, the ANC had to be seen in the pursuit of racial transformation to satisfy its base, and many of these white professionals and managers were encouraged to leave the civil service. The ANC's biggest indictment was the lack of foresight in recognizing the tremendous loss of skilled labor this represented, and they failed to plan for the training of replacements of these teachers and working professionals.
Remember that South Africa is a new democracy, and in those years we have failed to train new teachers.
It has taken 18 years for the loss of managerial skills to reach critical mass and reflect in the current failure of public education and local government services. The private education sector, where most of these skilled white professionals went, is thriving, still mostly for the benefit of white South Africans. Hence, the persistent racial inequality.
Education is changing in a very drastic way, and at the capacity level as well as the content level. Essentially what happens now is you can actually train teachers who may not necessarily be adept in teaching by giving them resources that they can use on the iPad and the Droid platforms to be able to share information in a way that is interactive for their students and audience. It's also changing very dramatically in terms of how we think about content and how students should be able to interact and engage with the learning in classroom and out of classroom. So I think these, opportunities for apps, for Kindles, etc., all these things that are developing, that's transforming the publishing industry and how we receive content as well as how we engage it, I think is very important and a useful point for us to think about what are the further opportunities that we can use for this, especially in the developing world.
Part of what we need to look at is to see how we can bring in some of the expatriates from the African continent who are really solid in this area to come and assist us. For instance, teachers in Zimbabwe are very, very well trained in maths and science. Teachers in Lesotho are amazingly trained in maths and science. So we must make it easy for these folks to come and teach our people. Folks in Ghana, and some of them are actually in the Eastern Cape already, are very strong in there. But I think we don't have a solid program that encourages those kind of people to be able to come and assist us, in addition to what we do anyway as a country, because as I said that we have the private sector, we have government looking into that. So it's more about implementation.
An equal indictment should be apportioned to the lack of social activism from the growing black middle class. Protests are mainly concentrated to townships and are politically driven by economically marginalized individuals whom the elite can afford to ignore. It is only when black professionals take the initiative to build up largely ignored black communities will South Africa truly become the Rainbow Nation.
There are innovators in education out there that are now trying new ways to get kids to be creative, to think for themselves, to find their own solutions to problems instead of try to memorize the one that's in the book. I think that is the future direction for South African education to go, but they still have a long way to go to get there.
Africa is at a point in its legacy where it has the opportunity to leapfrog. And technology will play a very critical role in us being able to empower the 500 million youth that are going to dominate this continent in the next 20 years.
It's a long-term investment. So if you haven't been investing properly for the past 18 to 20 years, you need also to give yourself a bit of time to deal with the imbalances of the past.